end if possible. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this along, and we're going to start the presentation.
Good morning or afternoon, and welcome.
Good morning.
And it's good to see all of you signing in, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. A reminder, please, to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. And John McDermott is available to help you throughout the webinar or any challenges that you may be having. Today's topic, delivery of services to American Indian and Alaska Natives with disabilities, is extremely broad, and due to time restraints, all the components in each training area will not be covered in detail. Please use the chat box to keep us informed so that we can respond to any of your questions, and it may be forwarded on to our community of practice on Wednesday. Lee and I want to say a special thank you to our team here at NAU, John and Dana, Daryl and Georgianne, for all the help in making this webinar possible. Pictures are an important expression of learning, so if you have any pictures of any of your program activities, such as Disability Awareness Day or Indigenous Awareness Day, program group activities, please consider sending to AIVRTTAC so we can increase our library of pictures. And Lee came up with a wonderful idea that if you have a website, if you would mind sending it to us here at NAU, at AIVRTTAC, we could post them on our website to help promote your program. The thought for today is hospitality, and we know there are many steps that directors and VR counselors journey together with their consumers. Therefore, one word to remember is hospitality. Please be hospitable to applicants and consumers, and let them know you are sincerely into who they are as a person, and and show you care. Build a community of trust. Greeting all visitors, and I think, Lee, this is your piece here.
Okay. It's important to greet all visitors to your office with a friendly hello, how are you doing, and how may I help you? When answering the phone, put a smile on your face and it will translate to the party at the other end of the phone.
Okay, so we're on to the next slide. And I am Suzanne Malson, and I am the Vocational Rehabilitation Training and TA Specialist, and I have over 15 years of work experience in tribal vocational rehabilitation.
And I am Lee Gaseoma, a member of the Hopi tribe. I am the Project Director for AIVRTTAC, and I have over 20 years of work experience in providing training and TA to the American Indian VR services programs. The 7 learning objectives for this particular webinar is for the AIVR programs to understand at the end of this webinar as follows: to gain insight into one example of an AIVRS process model. Number 2, to understand the importance of a systematic and sequential documentation of the delivery of consumer services. Number 3, to understand the benefit of conducting a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's impediment to employment for determining eligibility. Number 4, to gain understanding of a holistic approach to the provision of tribal consumer services. Number 5, to understand the importance of the joint development of the IPE, the consumer and the VR counselor, focusing on consumers' informed choice. Number 6, to provide VR services as described in the IPE. And number 7, to determine the criteria for post-employment services.
Next slide. What you see this morning or this afternoon on your screen is a success wheel. And the success wheel is a visual aid for the process for an applicant and a consumer as they experience their journey in your AIVRS program. The process starts with the consumer in the middle, the blue diamond shape, and everything else around the diamond pertains to how your program is embracing the consumer and assisting the consumer. So it also begins with the orientation, and then as you look into the yellow piece of this wheel, you see intake, and the next section is employment, and the next section, the black section, is the IPE, the Individualized Plan for Employment, and then we have the employment section. And we recognize that not all American Indian and Alaska Natives use a medicine wheel. However, the AIVRS culture has borrowed different symbols to express honoring of all traditions. This is a wonderful tool to assist you with your applicants and your consumers to reduce the confusion about where are they in the process. Next slide.
The first step is the intake and application process, where an applicant may refer themselves or be referred by a family member or an organization or agency within your communities.
Next slide.
All vocational rehabilitation processes are linked to each other and must be completed before another one begins. For example, we need to start out with orientation to intake, leading to intake to application, application to eligibility, eligibility to case open to individualized plan for employment, individualized plan for employment to employment, and employment to case closure.
So the intake and application process, and we have our little yellow pie piece there. The intake is the most vital part of the AIVRS program because this is the first formal meeting between a VR counselor and a potential consumer who may be uneasy about vocational rehabilitation process. What happens during the intake interview? Building of trust through program hospitality, share program information, gathering applicant data and information, filling out and signing forms, and the explanation of the VR process. How do we get to the next slide?
Part of the process includes making sure that you inform the applicants of their rights, responsibilities of the applicant and the AIVRS program, the state services through the provision of services through the client assistant program, confidentiality to ensure that your program has procedures set in place that will protect all information regarding the applicant and the consumer, and also ensuring that you assist your consumers to consider the use of comparable services and benefits, and also making sure that you provide information regarding the ethical responsibilities of your program.
Next slide. Next slide. I need this one enhanced. I need this. Okay. Potential consumer and AIVRS counselor. What we're looking at here is the intake is a comprehensive process to determine how an individual's disability is an impediment to employment. VR counselors need to observe potential consumers closely for signs of weariness or hunger. Schedule another appointment if necessary. The person sitting opposite you may be a diabetic and may require a sugar snack. Invite your applicant to sit down in a comfortable setting and avoid barriers such as desks. VR counselors need to ease any anxiety a person may feel or may be experiencing while going through a difficult process. Next slide.
One of the questions that we pose to you is your AIVRS program sensitive to the needs of your people with disabilities. Some of the AIVRS programs, as part of their program design, provide information to explain the purpose and intent of a holistic approach to services that makes it different from the state VR agency. In this instance, while you're conducting your intake and your assessment, you are looking at 4 domains. The first is the physical, mental, and what is different about the AIVRS program is the spiritual and emotional needs. Also take into consideration the environment in which the individual resides.
Well, we're having a little conversation here. Okay. Daryl had a great deal of input in this particular piece, so thank you, Daryl. The AIRS looks at the holistic approach. Is also important to look at the internal and external environment of people with disabilities. Examples of external factors are cultural traditions, remoteness and lack of resources, employment and education, opportunities or the lack of opportunities, and the lack of economic development. We're also looking at urban versus rural. Next slide. Next slide. About the AIRS. Inform your potential consumers about the AIRS program. Handouts are helpful tools such as the Consumer Handbook and brochures, and also the success wheel that we introduced this morning. Talk about program personnel, ethics, and confidentiality. Discuss applicants' work history and educational background. Next slide.
One of the things to remember as part of this process is to ensure that your program prepares its material in alternate format. These examples include preparation in Braille, large print, audio recording, and the use of CDs.
Thank you. Always remember that the person requesting services may hesitate about asking for help. Always presume that a potential consumer is eligible for services. Be kind and generous with time, and be sure all questions are answered with sincerity and accuracy. If a VR counselor is unsure of an answer, inform the potential consumer that an answer will be provided at the next meeting. Applying the applicable program code of ethics, and that is to do no harm, to demonstrate respect for each individual's culture, history, and traditions. Do not make any assumptions. Next slide, please.
Sometimes you may need to consider requesting for outside evaluation to determine an individual's disability or to determine how an individual's impediment serves as an impediment to their employment. And this process is important in gathering additional data to determine an applicant's eligibility for services.
Next slide. Eligibility. Determining eligibility is a comprehensive assessment of the following criteria. The eligibility of a potential consumer is the responsibility of a VR counselor. Documents providing applicants' eligibility must be linked to case notes. This is really an important piece, and we have our wonderful little red piece of pie in there reminding us that this is part of the eligibility process. Thank you. Next slide, please. Documents that are required to determine eligibility that must be processed during the applicant's process is the medical record, school records, SSI and/or SSDI documentation. Presumptive eligibility with either of these documentations is required. Documentation from outside professional vocational assessments. Next slide. An individual is presumed to benefit under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended in 1998, Section 102C. Presumptive eligibility refers to an individual who is receiving Social Security Disability Insurance, which is SSDI, or Supplemental Security Income, which is SSI. Presumptive eligibility for VR services is when an individual is receiving Social Security benefits, which is Title II SSI or Title 16 SSDI. Next slide, please.
The criteria for determining applicants' eligibility include determining whether an applicant is a tribal member of a federal or state recognized American Indian tribe or Alaska Native. The applicant must reside on or near the reservation or in the designated geographic service area, and this may be presented in your grant proposal. The person must have a mental or physical impairment which constitutes or results in a substantial impediment to employment. And
the next slide.
Vocational rehabilitation services are required for this individual to secure, retain, or regain employment that is consistent with the applicant's unique strength, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and most important, informed choice. The applicant can benefit from the provided services to achieve an employment outcome from the AIVRS program.
Next slide.
Before a final decision is determined about the provision of services for tribal consumers too severe to benefit from your program services, consider acquiring an outside evaluation and technological assessment to better identify an individual's vocational abilities.
Next slide, please.
Evaluation options from external sources include psychological evaluation, assistive technology assessment, reasonable accommodations and evaluations at potential worksite to assess an appropriate work setting for individuals who are more severely disabled.
Next slide.
Documents required for eligibility. You may be using an individual's tribal identification card or a CIB, the Certificate of Indian Blood. We also look at whether or not the applicant reside on or near your reservation, and we are expected to determine an applicant's eligibility within 60 days.
Next slide, please.
If for some reason an applicant is ineligible for your services, please make sure that an ineligibility determination is only made after providing an opportunity for full consultation with the applicant or individual and the individual's family member or representative.
Next slide, please. A case is open when a VR counselor determines an applicant eligible for VR services. The VR counselor signs off on the eligibility statement and/or creates a case note to support decision. All internal documents and external eligibility documents are placed in a consumer's file. Next slide, please. The Individualized Plan for Employment is the written plan outlining a consumer's goals and the services required to reach those goals. The IP is written based on a VR counselor's assessment and/or external assessment and consumer's input. The plan is designed to recognize an individual's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. Next slide, please. The IPE is developed in collaboration and partnership with the participant of their representatives as appropriate and the VR counselor. I missed a section. Forgive me. The implementation of the IPE should begin with 30 calendar days of signatures If more time is required, written justification for extension must be provided every 30 days from that point on. Next slide, please. Where are we? Family can participate in the process if necessary at the request of the consumer. The IPE must be reviewed annually. Next slide. The IPE criteria: employment goals, objectives to meet goals, services needed to reach consumer goals include the services from other agencies if available, responsibilities of consumer, traditional healing services as appropriate, responsibility of AIVRS program, comparable services, and the VR counselor will assist in the development of an IPE. Next slide, please. Vital information VR counselors need from consumers for joint development of an IPE, and that is to gather information on education, employment, history, and health, assess individuals' functional capacities, explore vocational options, investigate the details of multiple vocations that may be of interest, explore education and training opportunities. Next slide, please. Expectation from consumer-informed choices. A desired outcome of employment in a competitive integrated work setting. Expectation of achieving the goals in the IPE that leads to employment. Know the vocational services required to achieve the goals of the IPE. Consumers know their responsibilities, know responsibilities of the heirs, and know the costs associated with the planned services. Next slide. Provision of consumer services is based on the IPE. The IPE is monitored to determine if there is a need for an amendment to the IPE based on a consumer's changing situation of progression of a disability. The IPE can be amended at any time during the consumer's relationship with heirs. However, it is mandatory to meet with a consumer once a year to ensure that goals are met and perhaps a revision to the existing IPE. Next slide, please.
Employment and case closure. Successful employment for the VR programs is successful 90-day employment in the consumer's choice of work environment. We also need to look at the reasonable accommodations for the consumers to perform their duties effectively and efficiently. We also need to determine whether or not the job placement is appropriate in an integrated setting to the satisfaction of the consumer and employer.
Next slide, please. Meet with the consumer and consider if post-employment services will be required. Conduct an exit interview with the consumer and have consumer complete a satisfaction survey. Celebrate a consumer's successful employment outcome with staff, family, council staff, council members, and employers. Anyone that has been a participant, there might be some of your stakeholders might be involved. So be sure to invite everyone. It's a big time in a consumer's life. Next slide, please. Tracking a successful closure. 3 months after closure, 6 months after closure, and 1 year after closure. The AIVRS method for internal data collection must be able to provide 3 months, 6 month, and 1 year tracking for successful employment outcomes for the annual performance report. And a question we pose to you: do you have a closure document that allows you to contact the employer in the event you cannot reach your consumer? Next slide, please. Other reasons for closure: if a consumer indicates they are no longer interested in the services of the AIVRS program, if the AIVRS counselor is unable to locate or contact a consumer, if a consumer is no longer available to receive services, if a consumer cannot achieve suitable employment, if a consumer fails to cooperate. Next slide, please. Consumers are eligible for post-employment services for 12 months after a case is closed. A former consumer may also reopen their case in the event that their disability has progressed, or they may require extended VR services that cannot be achieved under a post-employment services. Did you want to read the...
The rationale for opening a new case would be to examine if the individual's disability has progressed and is now presenting a different set of impediments to maintain or retain employment. If so, there may be a need for the consumer to explore a different vocational goal in relation to their functional abilities and career interests.
Next slide, please.
Responsibilities of the AIVRS also include informing Social Security Administration if a consumer is currently receiving SSA benefits and has failed to achieve an employment outcome. The AIVRS programs are required to submit a disclosure report regarding information on a consumer status to the Social Security Administration.
Next slide. And here we are, back to our model, our success wheel. We have come full circle, and we are back to this model to understand the importance of the systematic and sequential documentation of the delivery of consumer services. Remember always that your consumer is the center of everything. Your applicant is the center of everything. Be joyful when they enter your program and treat them with great respect. Do you have, Daryl, did you want to say something? Daryl is a bit shy, Daryl Joseph, and we're so happy that he's aboard. He's contributed so much to the essence of what we're doing here at AIVRTTAC. And is there anything else we need to discuss this morning? We probably have some questions. John?
Yeah, it can be opened up to questions now. They can put them in the chat area. And if there's a specific slide that you want to ask a question about, we can move back to it and we can address it from there.
Where you will typically find information regarding the information that we just covered is in your grant proposal. It will provide you with information regarding the needs of the population that you're serving, the magnitude of need for VR services, the goals and objectives that you will pursue to serve tribal members with disabilities to prepare for gainful employment. Another important component of your program design is the method by which you will provide services, including provision of traditional healing services. And to measure the impact of program services, you should have an appropriate and thorough evaluation plan as part of your program evaluation. The other thing to keep in mind that the AIVRS programs are expected to comply with the special application requirements, which is a different section of your grant proposal.
Other options that you may have you may have developed a consumer handbook, which is also, you document almost everything that we covered in the webinar this morning. Something of real importance, do you have a fair hearing process, and have you worked with your tribal council to make it something that is a legal process for a consumer? The consumer has a right to complain, and that's why you have the CAP, and you also have the tribal process of a fair hearing. Other documents that you may want to use is you may have a policy and procedure handbook for for your program, and you also may have something for a counselor.
What I want to bring to your attention is you may have recognized that with your initial registration for today's webinar, you are also have been registered to participate in the Community of Practice discussion on Wednesday, the same time, which is the Arizona time from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. On Friday, we will do a follow-up webinar on the same training topic. And at this time, if you have any questions or comments regarding our presentation, please post so accordingly on the website. Also indicating which particular sections of our presentations you would like to discuss in more detail during the group discussion on Wednesday.
So
I
we
think
have our
John-
first question. It's
Yes.
from Donna Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And she asks, are we still allowed to count homemaker services?
Good question, Donna. Thank you.
I'm going to say that it used to be an allowable program service, but I would prefer that Suzanne and I check on that before we provide you with an answer. And we discussion on Wednesday.
All right, and the question after Donna is from Trilby Kerrigan, and it says, under DO requirements, you listed 2 documents, tribal ID and residency. Is that all the forms they would need to apply, excluding the verification of disability?
Some programs are developed somewhat different. Some programs, as part of their initial intake, will require verification of tribal membership, and that is usually produced through the Certificate of Indian Blood. We also need to determine whether or not the applicant meets the residential requirement. So looking at a bill, for example, the electricity bill, will demonstrate that the applicant does indeed reside on or near your designated service area. Other documentation that will determine an applicant's eligibility could be presented from their medical records, and any other assessment that is conducted by an external evaluator, such as a psychological evaluation, a vocational assessment, and in some cases, the tribes may not have the expertise to conduct these assessments locally and will purchase the service from an external vendor.
All right, that's Trilby's question. We're going to move on to Mark Espino, and he asks, can you review information around eligibility determination extensions if eligibility cannot be determined within 60 days?
If an eligibility for any applicant is not determined, then you may go into an extended evaluation period, and that is within the 90-day framework where you would gather additional information or documentation to determine whether or not the applicant is eligible for your services. But the 4 criteria that we covered previously should be used for all applicants, irregardless of the location of the tribal work rehab programs.
All right, next question is from James Allen, and it says, so if a client is receiving SSI or SSDI, they are presumed to be eligible because the federal government has approved their disability for receiving benefits. This in itself then would be enough to enroll a client?
No. Presumption of eligibility for beneficiaries of SSI or SSDI, they still need to go through the same application criteria or application process and determining whether they meet the criteria that we covered. It doesn't automatically determine them eligible for your program services.
Or exempt them from the process, the tribal vocational rehabilitation process.
All right. Moving down, we have another question from James. He asks, is substance abuse considered a disability and enough to enroll a tribal folk rehab program?
Yes and no. Substance disorder. If we use the term disorder, it's really important to recognize that it is a disability. The state does not recognize substance disorder. You have to be careful of how you document. An individual has to follow certain criteria. You need to be linked with your substance abuse program in your tribe. You must have all the documentation. They must go through any of the criteria that you need to set in order for an individual to be considered having a disability. It is recognized in tribal VR, and Lee and I will do some investigation to make sure that I am not providing you misinformation. But as far as I know, it is considered a disability, and start using the term as alcohol or drug disorder, and be sure you're linking it with an AA meeting, a tribal AA meeting, or an NA meeting, and you're linking it with your behavioral health department so that everything is linked together, that you're not just providing a cane for somebody to walk through our program. Thank you.
All right. Susie Calhoun asks, when did state tribes become recognized for tribal RSA programs?
Mm-hmm.
I can't be specific about the date regarding when they were determined eligible to apply for and receive the vocational rehabilitation services. And I will need to check into that to make sure that I have the correct language before I respond any further.
Next is Dolores McKenzie, and she asks, do we still need documentation of disability if the client is presumed eligible because of receiving SSDI, SSI?
Yes.
That is correct. Whether or not an individual is a beneficiary of SSI or SSDI, that particular individual will need to go through the same intake process and will need to meet the same criteria established for the tribal voc rehab programs.
All right, we'll move down to Diana Gomez, and she asks, do consumers have to sign an ROI so that their family members can participate in their voc rehab plan?
No.
No. A applicant can invite a family member or a significant other to be part of the intake process, and if they so desire, that individual will be a partner throughout the whole complete VR process. You just need to make sure that you indicate this in your case note as to the reason, the purpose, and the intent of including other individuals in the consumer's participation in your program.
All right, we have a question from Latana Plummer. The speakers are cutting in and out, and we are unable to hear all of the responses. Is it possible to get the answers to the questions asked in written form? And I can answer that question. The answer will be yes. We'll send that out for people to reference after the webinar.
And any part of the presentation that may not have come through clear on your end, the questions that are being posed will be considered for the community of practice discussion on Wednesday.
Do we have another question?
Yes, James Allen says, so it would be better to group a substance disorder with another disability to help make a client eligible for VR services?
It's not necessary, but it is generally it could be a co-occurring disorder, such as a mental disorder and substance disorder, but many times the disabilities run, somebody that's been on a substance for any length of time might have diabetes, might have some other issues. So certainly it does strengthen it. If you need to work with the consumer to determine which is the disability 1, disability 2, or disability 3. Do not make assumptions that to strengthen your case you need to change an order of a disability, such as making diabetes first and then the substance disorder second. I hope I answered that.
This will be an answer to Donna and Dolores about archiving the webinar. We're going to try to have it out by the end of the day today, if not the beginning of tomorrow. But we'll send that out as a link. You can go to AIVRTTAC.org. I'll put that into the chat area, and you should be able to see the webinar archived on there. So I'll move on to James Allen's question. If a client has substance disorder as a disability, will there be a problem with co-enrolling this client with a state DVR?
Yes, because the state doesn't recognize, as far as I know, and I can clarify, and every state is different, but I was the director in Arizona, and the state does not recognize disability disorder. So that piece of it would have to be tribal VR services only. I would recommend that you talk with your state representative and ask how an agreement between both of your programs can be established in order to provide this individual the best services possible from both the tribal VR and the state VR. Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
I want to also bring to your attention that during the community of practice discussion on Wednesday, you will have an opportunity to present or pose questions to your peers. In the community of practice, one of the advantages of talking or having communications among peer-to-peer is to share your expertise and knowledge. Also informing those programs who may be in need of forms development, who may need assistance in developing their policies and procedures, but it's an excellent opportunity to share among each others what you would consider best practice in providing culturally appropriate services to your tribal consumers.
Be sure that when you have a consumer with you and you have met them, well, you're going through the process of determining their particular disability. Be sure that the documentation, all documentation, everything that you talk about must be in a case note. It's not enough just to have a formal document from an establishment. You must have a case note that matches it. These are the things that are really important that strengthen your case in terms of serving an individual. Some of your data gathering programs now have the ability to scan your official documents in so that then you will have your documents all in one place, but still keep the paper trail. It's always important to have those papers all lined up, signed, and appropriately in a consumer's case file.
If there are no further questions or comments, we will summarize today's presentation. Again, informing you that this particular training module is broad in nature. Therefore, we may not have covered and provided details regarding particular questions or challenges that you may be experiencing as part of your program provision of services. So please make a note of those issues, concerns, and present them during the community of practice on Wednesday. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Evaluation. I put the link into the chat area.
John has put the evaluation into the link chat area. Please be sure to open it and provide us some feedback. We really, in these beginning stages of our first webinars, we really need the information desperately, because we want to make these webinars increasingly better, and before our consultants come aboard and we'll be providing you some extraordinary, wonderful webinars, we really want to make their process as easy as and effective as possible. So hearing from you is extremely, extremely important. Remember to send pictures of any pictures that you may have would be really wonderful. It becomes more personal than it's Lee talked about. It seems that we are developing a culture of the American Indian Vocational Rehabilitation Services programs, and this is part of our culture, any of the pictures that we may have. KNAR probably has some pictures that they wouldn't mind sharing. Your websites, if any of you have a website, be sure to share it with us. We'd love to see it, and if you provide it to us, we can put it on the AIVRTTAC website, and it increases and promotes your program, and also it provides other programs the opportunity to look at, and we grow through experience and sharing. That's how we have become so strong over these past years, that we have all been doing American Indian, Alaska Native VR services. We thank you here from the Institute for Human Development, our wonderful team, John and his staff, and Georgie, and Daryl, and Lee, and I, and Dana, who is the gal that provides the evaluation for us, the evaluation forms, and documents everything. We're so pleased that you invited us into your offices today and gave us an opportunity to share this important information. As Lee said before, it's very detailed, and for the short time that we have, there's just no way that we can get into the detail, but make this your webinar by providing us the information that you want in detail. And we thank you here, from here.
I'm going to place the AIVRTTAC website link into the chat area. You can check back maybe by the end of today. We'll have all the videos up there, or actually the video of this webinar up there, and the transcript, but also you can download the PowerPoint slides as well. If there are not any other questions or any other comments, we can sign off from here. And be sure that the URL that you received in the confirmation email will bring you into the community of practice on Wednesday, and also the follow-up webinar on Friday. So it's the same link to bring you into the show.
So what?
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.